Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I guess I should say good afternoon and good evening. Robin is joining us here at 7 p.m. his time. My name is Megan Macaluso. I'm the VP of Customer Success and Operations at ESG. We deliver customer success as a service, and I will be the moderator for today's event hosted by ChurnZero. And I'd like to welcome you to our webinar titled How Your Organization Can Achieve a Customer-First Transformation. Before we get started, I'd like to remind you that we are recording the session. A link to the recording will be available 24 hours after the webinar. Throughout the presentation, you are welcome to submit your questions via the questions tab, and we will try to answer them as we go. We will also address many questions as we can during the Q&A portion of the webinar towards the end of the discussion. Now, I am pleased to introduce you to our two featured speakers today. We have Abby Hammer, who is the Chief Customer Officer and founding team member of ChurnZero, which is a real-time customer success platform. We also are joined by Robin van de Schout, who is CEO and co-founder co-founder of Untitled, which is a customer community platform. Since Abby and Robin both built customer-first organizations, we are going to talk to them today to understand why and how they put the customer at the center of their business from the ground up. So I think it'd be good to give you each an opportunity to give a little background on how you got to where you are today, share what you're seeing in the market that led you to create products that you did. So Abby, would you like to get us started?
Yeah, sure. Great. Thank you, Megan. And, first I want to say thanks to Robin for joining me today. He and I are both very passionate about this topic, and it's always fun to talk to people who are passionate about something you're passionate about. So looking forward to the discussion today. Little backstory on myself and on ChurnZero. ChurnZero's origin story is actually a bit of a story around customer centricity. So our two co-founders, who are now our CEO and our CTO, and myself, we all used to work at a company that created PR and marketing SaaS solutions. And we had clear churn problems, especially amongst particular subsets of our customers. And we were really struggling to understand the full problem and figure out the right tactics, employ the right tactics to fight it. And so at the time, we looked at the customer success platforms that were on the market. We even got so far as getting some contracts in hand, but ultimately we didn't purchase anything. And that came down to the fact that when we looked at the solutions, we didn't feel like they truly understood us and met our real needs, both at the, sort of the strategy level, but also at the tactical level. So that made us really want to develop a solution that reflected our needs, reflected our goals. And from that, point of real genuine need for our business is where the first version of ChurnZero, if you will, came to be. So knowing that it's customers and building products and services that are undeniably useful to our customers has been part of our DNA from the start of ChurnZero. It's something I'm very proud of, and I know, others who are part of the founding team are as well. There's certainly a lot of stuff that we do at ChurnZero that represents our commitment to customer centricity. I know we're going to talk about a lot of that today. But for starters, I tell people that I think my role, who I am and what I do at the company is one of the first indications as well. Yes, I'm our Chief Customer Officer, but I'm also our Head of Product, which is a very unusual combination, to be sure. I get a lot of raised eyebrows when that comes up. But given that we're a CS solution, it's really worked well for us and really worked well for our customers to keep our customer success team and our product extremely tightly tied together, all the way up to the point of going to the same leader and having a lot of the same objectives, and same metrics and things like that. So a little background on me, and I'm excited to, dive more into the topic and chat with Robin about his perspective as well.
Wonderful, Abby, thank you. And I do have to say, ESG has worked with ChurnZero on a number of different initiatives and products over the past couple of years. And from an outside perspective, every person that works at that organization is always highly responsive, and everyone listens and has been lovely to work with at your organization. And so that's unique, I think, in the world that we live in, that no matter if I'm talking to sales there or customer success or product or your marketing team, everyone has this very consistent way of being just really friendly and great. And so I just want to Just
Thank
let,
you. That's
yep,
very sweet. I
it's,
appreciate that. That means a lot to us. It does.
yeah, it's absolutely true. So, but so thank you for sharing your background. Robin, please share a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, definitely. So first of all, of course, thanks for having me, Megan and Abby. So yeah, my background is actually fully in online engagement. So I've been doing customer engagement programs for, let's say, 20 years or so. I actually started building my own community in the late 90s, so way back basically. And at that time, I was looking for a place to actually connect with peers around a hobby project of mine around consumer electronics. So I basically wanted to have like a sense of belonging, around the thing, I was interested in, really connecting with others on that topic. So I started to create that platform, that place, that online platform community with forums and news and articles, and actually build that out to a site which had over 5 million unique visitors a month at that time. So that was quite a success. And then later in my next step in my professional life, I kind of started doing that for companies. So I kind of rolled into enterprise software because there was actually a need of connecting customers with companies. And then the customer success movement actually grew a lot, right? Recent years. So it felt like a great home for what I've been basically trying to do. And I think customer success is a great place for communities to land because there's so much overlap in what customer success is trying to achieve and what communities can do basically in that. So we're now building out inside of that company in that space. We have like global customers. We have offices in New York as well as in Europe. And we work for companies like Mixpanel and Zapier, Pipefy. So all these cool SaaS brands really enabling companies to engage with customers in a smarter way. Almost 10 years already. So yeah, really been a great success so far.
Yeah, that's well ahead of the curve, Robin, and that's like what a cool like journey from early times, right? To just be able to like ride that wave so naturally, and probably too to just have that validation that like, hey, this thing that I really cared about and built really is super important all over. That's awesome. Okay, well, before we get started into our discussion topics, we want to put our first poll out to our listeners. So here's the question. Would you say your organization is customer-centric? And so the options are to a great extent, somewhat, very little, or not at all. So we'll give you guys a moment to answer that, get some feedback, and then we're going to jump right into that very topic, as a matter of fact. And it looks like as the numbers are coming in, that people are saying by and large somewhat, which I don't think is very surprising. I think it's something we all endeavor to do, but it's harder to operationalize than it can seem from the outside. Awesome.
Yeah, it looks like we've gotten over 50% and somewhat.
Yep.
Well, a fair amount and a great extent, which is very exciting.
That is exciting.
Definitely.
Well, to that point, then let's jump into our first discussion point. So, and Abby, we'll start with you. From your perspective, what does it mean to be truly customer centric? So we throw that out into a poll, and I'm sure everyone kind of has a different idea of what they think that means. But for you, how do you define customer centricity?
Yeah, like all things that I think resonate, the idea of being customer centric really resonates with a lot of us. So in some ways, I think the term gets overused almost, to cover a whole blanket of different ideas and objectives. For me, I think being customer centric really comes down to putting the customer at the forefront of every decision that your company makes. And it may seem like it's, semantics, but there's a difference between looking at a customer or considering the customer and actually trying to think like the customer. And I think that's the real distinction between doing a lot of things that are, customer focused or customer facing, but not truly making that transition into customer centricity. I think a lot of times it can be easiest to figure out whether you're customer centric or not there are some clear signs, at least to me, that signal that maybe you're not as much as possible. A lot of times I'll see like, okay, well, we talk a lot about how a decision is going to impact a customer. as opposed to, well, did we actually take a step back and talk about whether it was the right decision for the customer? Did it come before or after the decision was made? A lot of times we'll see companies that are focused really on customer service in a reactive capacity, which is an important critical part of a business. But again, when we're thinking about trying to put the customer, think like the customer, that's where something like customer success and communities and these proactive, these proactive measures become really the differentiator. And then I think it's also about like what you socialize amongst the company. A lot of times when people talk to me about their board meetings or about their company, all company hands, there are certain metrics that sort of drive the drum of a business, and sometimes we don't see customer-centric metrics in that mix. It's not even that there aren't metrics on customers, but they're not ones that really give a clear picture about what's happening to a customer, about how the decisions the business is making are impacting the customer. So that's really where I come at for everything else we're talking about. Like, do we do more than just look at the customer? Do we actually try to take that extra step and think like them? Robin, I don't know if you if you have a definition that's different than mine. I'd love to hear.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. What is indeed the definition? I think maybe it starts with making sure that all aspects of your business and all business decisions basically consider the customer, and I guess especially the customer experience. Maybe eventually defining value as customer first instead of maybe product first. So basically, I'm saying I think it's also not necessarily all about sales or all about the product. It's really understanding that the customer is really at the center of what you do, right? And I think then the question is how you do that. Yeah, that's I guess super difficult. How do we really understand what customers want? How do we drive customer success? I think there's no one single metric where you can score yourself on. Then you can actually be a 10 as a customer-centric company. And I think for me, it's also, a little bit of a mindset, right? I think overall, we should strive for a great customer experience, a great customer outcome. But if you look at, how the best companies do this, I think, at least, a key thing is that you need to think of customer success not so much as a department only, but really as a mindset, right? Because it's not just a couple of people who can drive this. And also, if you look at it from a customer perspective, they don't really care if they're dealing with sales or marketing or support or finance. They just want to have a great experience and a great outcome across the board. So I think companies have to make sure that everything is online, right? Marketing should advertise the right value. Sales has to make sure that the ROI they claim basically is correct. The onboarding should go smooth. The product should work and provide value. Even the billing process, in a way, should be a good experience. So I think as a customer success department, you definitely have your own specific tasks, but you also need to help, the entire organization driving into the right direction.
And that's, you guys said a couple of really interesting things that I think meet well. So Rob, when you talk about like, does the whole company have the mindset, right? And Abby, when you were talking about what customer metrics are you presenting to your leadership and to your board, I feel like we still hear a lot like, well, don't talk about your customer metrics to your board or to your CFO because really all they care about is the number, right? Like that, I still think we live in a world where that is probably by and large very true. But we're getting to a place where we're starting to say, hey, the reason why your NPS or your CSAT or your engagement or your adoption or like go down the list of what your company measures is so critical is because without that, we don't recognize, we don't see that revenue come, right? And so it's important to bring, I think, Abby, you mentioned like front and center, that customer experience to the highest level of your organization. So like the vision is the same for everyone. And it sounds like for both of you, that's probably been easier because the companies start out that way, right? Like if you can start your business with that mindset, that probably goes a really long way. But as we talk about those internal teams and structure pieces that we started to dig into, I think a lot of folks that are listening probably are in organizations that are transforming to try to be more customer centric versus they were able to kind of originate that way. So Abby, in terms of how you look at customer centricity from an organizational and a team structure standpoint, what are the things that Churn Zero does that you think could help people understand that better?
Yeah, so I'm going to start by echoing something that Robin said, and that is that, there is no one team, even if you have a clearly defined customer success role, that is responsible for making the company customer centric.
Yeah.
It is a mindset. It's not a department, it's a mindset. Now I do think that customer success, the team, can lead the way and act as a very important centralizing force, but true customer centricity requires you to be cross-functional. And I think when we talk about cross-functional, we think, all right, well, if we communicate with one another, that's going to happen. At least in my experience, you've got to be a lot more proactive and prescriptive about what you do. So down to like, okay, what exact meetings do we need to have? What metrics are we going to circle around? How are individual teams structured to meet those metrics and goals? How are they maybe even compensated on those things? So instead of just hoping that, hey, if we circle up once a month and have a customer meeting, that's going to result in something, bigger and better, actually taking the steps and saying, what are the actual actions we need to do to get to a place of where we have consistent focus on the customer. And I think exactly what that means can be a little bit different depending on where your organization is at and where they're challenged. Some people have, they think their product needs the most work. And so that's going to change their focus. Other thinks it's a disconnect between sales and CS, and that's a major part of the challenge when they deal with customers and giving that good experience from end to end. So the exact things that you do and you focus on may vary organization to organization, but I think being very specific about the choices you make to facilitate those conversations is critical. I also think within CS, it's important that you structure your CS programs in a way that feeds into customer goals and needs, matches what a customer is looking for at a certain point in time. That can be challenging. To Robin's point, a customer doesn't care if they're talking to their CSM or talking to support, or they just want everybody to understand them and have a consistent experience. But the way you structure your programs and the team members that support that and how you share information amongst those team members, that's really where you go from having an idea of customer centricity to actually practicing customer centricity. Robin, I'm curious, when you guys think about your structures, what do you do that you think is really meaningful for customer to make sure the customer's at the center?
Yeah, definitely. And I think, to the point on mindset, I think, although, of course, it is a global mindset you have to have in your company, I think, a first good step is actually having that CS leader, in your organization. We shouldn't forget about that. And I'm hoping that leader actually also, reports to the CEO, basically, because I think that also gives a good signal, to, your company, but also to your customers. So maybe, then speaking about the team and the customer success team itself, we all talk about, things like, high touch or low and tech touch, and that there's different ways to actually serve your customers. So maybe for this discussion, I think just to add a different perspective there, I think I would actually vouch for, what we call self-service first. I think, all customers at this stage, they want to have, self-service options. And I think, we've all seen that the preference for self-service has long overtaken the preference of actually, contacting somebody from an organization. We've been seeing this also in our private life, right? So I would say, one of the things which has worked pretty well for us is to actually have like an engagement manager as part of your, organization, as part of your one-to-many strategy, basically. So we actually had a part-time role. So one of our CSMs in the early days, they had this idea of, let's see if we can, fuel our engagement among our customers. So this person actually started with office hours, among customer groups. He was adding best practices articles, to our, what we call our customer success knowledge base. He was posting, roadmap updates to all our customers. He was hosting smaller events, pre-COVID, obviously, connecting customers to each other. So I think, that notion of driving engagement among all your customers and between your customers, I think that worked really well in terms of, internal structure in our organization.
Yeah,
I like.
Sorry,
Megan. No, I was just going to say, I like in particular what Robin was saying about, finding out what the customer wants. Again, if this is all about coming back to the customer, if the customer wants one-on-one touches, how do you identify that and facilitate that? If they're a customer that likes self-service first, how do you identify that and facilitate that? So really structuring your teams, structuring your content, structuring your programs as you can find what you need in the preferred method of engagement that each customer might have. It certainly makes the challenge bigger. It's this many things you have to do as opposed to having one way you expect to work with everyone, but it does give that, it does give that very circular, holistic feeling to the customer.
Yeah. And maybe also kudos to, I guess, Abby and the team at Turn Zero, because I think also the future, of customer success should also be, I think, around deeper relationship with the product org, right? I think, the product is the most direct, responsible for enabling customer success usually, and typically in SaaS and B2B software companies. So I think they really need to have like a common mission, shared goals, but also celebrate, all the wins together. And I think, Abby, as you've been doing, as one leader, I think that really can boost, overall customer success efforts in the organization.
Yeah, and I will say, you do not necessarily have to have the same leader. For me, Turn Zero is a lovely opportunity because it's blending the two halves of my career. But if you have a CS leader and a product leader that are really well aligned, and you're proactively looking for those opportunities to interlace customers and your customer-facing teams into how you develop your roadmap, into making your customers feel like they see themselves in your product and in your roadmap, can be extremely effective, of course.
Definitely, yeah. You basically got married to yourself, right, Abby?
Yeah. I have two halves of a brain having separate conversations. It's very confusing sometimes.
Well, and just the cross-functional topic is so fascinating. I mean, we talk to companies a lot where product and customer success really are disparate, separate organizations, and there really isn't a good feedback loop, and you have significant development happening on the product side without any direct customer feedback coming through it. And I think the bigger companies get, sometimes that's a sort of a natural thing that happens, but it's so critical. And then something that you both talked about earlier as well, in terms of, where customer success teams tend to focus, that might be a little narrow, right? Like Abby, you mentioned, maybe your customer success team is more service oriented or, sales oriented, for instance, right? And I think some amount of self-awareness to your customer success team to say, like, where did we come from, right? Like, customer success sprung out of somewhere in your organization, and it was probably either account management or support or professional services, right? So if that happened, there's probably some behavior in your organization that just comes from your history that makes you really good in some areas and maybe a little weaker in others. And so as your company grows and as your team evolves, like having that self-awareness to say, where have we come from, but where are we trying to go? And how do we partner with other pieces of the business to make sure like we are addressing the needs of our customers holistically, right? So yeah, I mean, I think over time what's going to happen is that customer experience data and feedback is just going to become more and more part of what everyone's paying attention to, and customer success is right in the middle of all of those spokes, right? So how do you encourage organizations around you to work together, or in Abby's case, just just do product yourself. So anyway, it's just all really good and advanced thinking, I think, from both of you, because I think a lot of companies are still trying to understand how to work in that manner.
I think you touched on an important point, Megan. I know we're going to talk about this, so maybe I'm dragging us there a little too early, but I think the data is a really important point. To your idea that customer success is sprung up from a lot of places. I work with a lot of teams where the customer success team has not had autonomy over their own data. They've been reliant on other teams or other departments to understand data, even when it's about the groups that they work with, when it's about their customers. So, having that autonomy over data and then being very generous with that data and proactive in how you democratize that data is really important. I think silos happen with data just out of people not thinking about other ways it could be exposed. So sometimes putting the data out, the insights you have out, and seeing who reacts to things in different ways can illuminate these spots where you're like, oh, I never would have thought to share X, Y, and Z with my marketing team. But the moment that they saw that, they grabbed a hold of it and had an idea that they could do with it. And so if we treat customer data as sort of a collective pool that anybody can dive into whenever they need to, all with the goal of understanding the customer better and shaping things around the customer. I think it's a really critical component of making sure that everybody's on the same, train headed in the same direction.
And how often have we all said like, no, the data's there, I just can't get to it. Like for whatever reason, it's like either someone else owns it or security or just like the how to get into it and what to do with it and how to analyze it. We talk about different types of roles within your organization. Like, do you have a customer success operations like analyst, right? You have someone that's like focused on the data because it's just going to get richer and richer over time and impact more and more. And to sort of marry both like the data component and then like other types of ways of getting that customer feedback into your organization. Let's launch our second poll to the listeners around customer communities. So our second question is, does your organization already have an online customer community? We're going to talk about this because Robin's got some very special expertise in this area. And so we really seek to understand how many of our folks are yes, considering it, or no and not considering it. And we're getting some good answers in. It looks like, wow, it looks like a lot of people have them, which is awesome. But sort of even almost like 40 to 40% are considering it or have something in place already. Or that answer is no. Interesting. So to that point, when we start talking about the like processes and systems, right, and how you start operationalizing something like this. So let's maybe start, Abby, with talking about customer journey. So if you really want to be customer like first and outside in, how do you think through, defining customer journey to start with your processes and systems?
Yeah, so when a lot of groups dive into the tackle trying to map out their customer journey, a lot of times what I see, and I'm sure you see the same thing, Megan, working with groups, is that the journey ends up being defined in your internal terms, which, don't get me wrong, is an important component of it. There are things that we need to do to move a customer along, a process that we've decided they need to follow. But again, if we're looping back around and trying to say, okay, we don't want to just consider the customer, but we want to think like the customer, having a journey that is in the customer's terms. What do they need to experience? At what points? At what clips? They purchased for a reason. How long does it take to get us to that reason? And it's to some people it feels like a subtle mind shift, but it's so major to go from like, all right, I've listed out a series of meetings or a series of trainings I want you to go to, and that's my journey, to at this point I've expected you to experience this value, and if you haven't already at that point, I know we have something that needs to be addressed, something that's only going to fester and grow in not the way that I want for the months or years that are ahead of us. And so getting the customer's voice into the journey is so important. That leads into a lot of what Robin's focused on the community, because that's not just the customers having an idea of a voice. It's literally the customer's voice. It's and I think a big part of the journey that many of us struggle with or are still trying to figure out how you operationalize is, even if we're moving someone along, these sort of value points and helping them realize the things that they want, how do we also enrich their experience outside of just them working with us as their vendor? How do we enrich their experience and introduce them to literally a community of people who are thinking about the things they're thinking about, and can help with mind share? So as we talk about, sort of the fit between a CS and a community, I see this lovely way of having an online community build an actual network of people that can be an important part of whether a customer feels successful in their journey or not. I think also, and Robin, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, but I want to say one last thing on the journey part is that I think we get over-focused on, again, those meetings. We think too much about, okay, if I do that, everything has to be white glove. Robin talked about going back to the self-service. You don't have to do the exact same process with every single customer. I think we all know that, but sometimes we lose that devil in the details. But that doesn't mean that the process shouldn't be extremely thought out and extremely smooth, regardless of whether it is in more of a self-service, tech touch, engage with the community kind of direction, or very white glove, handheld. Robin, I'm interested from your perspective, as you guys move your customers through your onboarding journey, for example? How do you leverage your own community, your own expertise in building communities in that? Because I think it's such an interesting opportunity.
Definitely, yeah. So we really make sure that the community, is the #1 platform from the get-go. As soon as customers actually sign up with inside it, they become a customer, then we immediately introduce them, to our platform, because that's the centralized place, of all the content, interaction, engagement. Even most of our onboarding actually happens, through the community, because there's a lot of best practices and how-to content, which is, on the platform used in these onboarding processes. But even before that, to be honest, I think there is a lot of companies who are looking for a community. They even become active on our own community, right? So real prospects just browsing through our portal, see how we interact with our customers, see how we interact and react to feature requests, for example, which come from existing customers. See what type of thought leadership content we actually publish and best practices we share among our customer base. So actually, the journey, from many of our current customers actually started way before they became a customer, and that's, I think, also super powerful if you have an open, transparent, public platform, which is part of your own digital experience. Maybe to the other point, I think, and also relating to how you structure the teams, I think, as with every software company, we also were small back then, and we kind of use spreadsheets and email and all these general purpose communication tools like Slack and Zoom. But if you grow, you also need to uplift your process and tools around that, right? And I think of course, investing in tools like Churn Zero really makes sense. You really to have those playbooks and that 360 customer view. And I think a customer success community could also be part of that technology stack to really enable you to scale your customer success efforts to all your customers. And I think you need to really make it specific for our customer success, right? It needs to be a purpose-built platform to really, which really suits your existing use case, like onboarding, for example.
Yeah, and we've seen companies who have communities, like that's part of checking the box on onboarding, is engagement within the community, and that ways that you are measuring customer engagement is how engaged they are in the community and who the early adopters are, right? And where you get your case studies and where you get your advocates from, right? Like that's where those people come. And it's so, what's funny is, like, so often I think, Abby, to your earlier point, when you're creating a customer journey, that you're going from like an inside out view, is because it's much easier, right? Like we know our business and we know the path we want our customers to go down. And I think our intentions are good, right?
Of course, yeah.
But it's actually really hard to pull those thoughts and those feelings in a really specific way from customers without having what can be a very awkward conversation, or like, how do I ask this in a survey? They've probably gotten 10 surveys this week. Like, how am I going to get like this from them? But in a community, you can see it in a very like natural and kind of relaxed setting that I think is probably really hard to replicate in other ways.
Yeah, it reminds me a bit of, the best sales tactic is a happy customer who acts as a referral or a reference, and the same thing is true in CS. If you've got a happy, active community that, wants to talk about where they're succeeding and how they're succeeding and share with others, like, I can ask a customer to do something 10 times. If they see and get to interact with someone who looks like them, talks like them, has the same problem and solved it, they're going to be much more likely to engage with that than just because I've said like, no, trust me, like it's going to work, please go do that. So that it's this whole proof's in the pudding. We like to learn from other people who've been down that path. It just resonates a lot more than necessarily, even when we come from a place of best intentions around sharing best practices. It could just resonate so much better when it comes from a peer.
Yeah, definitely. And maybe another interesting use case, which we see a lot in related to communities, but maybe also related to the product discussion we had earlier. So I think when we at Untitled early days, we had this notion of customer success, or we kind of called it consultants, and they were basically doing everything, right? They did support requests, they did strategic projects with customers, they did feature requests among customers. So they were basically the catch-all department. And in the end, of course, that didn't really scale, right? Because these people needed to do everything. They need to have like such a broad skill set. And one of the things they did is they had like individual Excel sheets with customers where they listed all the feature requests these customers had. So if you have one CSM, maybe with 20 customers, they had like 20 different Excel sheets with these customers explaining, what type of feature requests these customers wanted. That didn't really scale, right? And you should also think about, is that really the most valuable time they can spend with with their customers, discussing these feature requests. And on the other end, the product organization, they were desperate for getting more insights, and they had the feeling they were missing out on all the details and all the ins and outs basically on those requests. So that's also when we introduce our product ideation, product feedback part, as part of our community, where customers can actually just submit all their feature requests. Other people can go there, they can upvote all these features, they can start a dialogue around these feature requests. The product team also chips in, and they will be answering questions or asking for more clarification. If we actually make sure that a specific ID gets implemented, we of course circle back and communicate it to the community saying, hey, this is an ID, it has like 50 votes, we are going to put this on the roadmap for the next quarter, and once it's delivered, we post an update about it. So this is really creating that transparent, customer first, centralized platform, I think, which made quite some impact for the product organization because they got more feedback and they were directly in connection with their customers, but also for the success team because they didn't have to focus on all these individual feature requests anymore, and they could actually focus on proactive, high value activities basically when they did an outreach with customers. So yeah, we kind of redefined the process and tools on how we served our customers best.
So Robin, I'd like to ask you like a practical application question. So if I'm a company and I am new to setting up my online community, and that is exactly a data point that's very important to us, right? Where we want to understand more about what customers want from the product itself. I mean, how would I go about putting that together, right? Like what are like the first things to sort of understand if that was something that I wanted to seek?
Yes, so around the launching of a community, you mean?
Mm-hmm. Well, and I guess maybe even like that particular piece of it, right? Like even just putting that in a box, like let's say I have like a community, but what I want is to engage customers to want to give me feedback on the product. Like how do you get customers to want to answer that question in that environment?
Yeah, I think a community in essence, right, is a joint value exchange, right? There has to be something for the organization, there has to be something for the customer. I think for the organization, it's pretty clear because you have that centralized place. It's great for workflow, for product management, all these things. But for for people, why would they actually go there? Well, because it's the only place where they can submit product feedback, right? It's a centralized place. It's transparent. It's where they connect with others. So what we typically see if organizations deploy a product feedback ideation part as part of their overall community efforts, people will go there by default because they have feedback around the product. I haven't spoke to any B2B organization who doesn't get any feedback around the product, right? It just doesn't happen. Everybody has requests and IDs, and all customers want to talk about that. So just offering them that place will already drive that initial traffic. And of course, you can when you launch it, you can start with some initial IDs. You can ask some of your super users, your advocates, to already start with first content, with first IDs. You can have your customer advisory board potentially part of your platform, so they can also kickstart some of the discussions. So of course, you have like an initial project with traffic content activation. But in the end, this is the place where customers definitely want to go to, because here they can have discussions around the product, and that's also what they want, right? Because they're usually quite motivated because they're using your product on a day-to-day basis, right? It's not they care, right? Else they probably wouldn't be a customer. They would already be churning and go speak with somebody else. But usually they care.
I think it's the two-way street as well, Robin. You said like the organization wants something and the customer wants something. So yeah, the customer wants to be able to talk about what they do and do not like, what they need. The organization wants to get good ideas. But I think it's also anytime you do anything, we talk about having these voice of the customer programs, get them involved in your roadmap, get them involved in how you present yourself and what you do. I think that the real kicker to those and where they work, any type of surveying or requests that you do of your customers really only work and really only count as being customer centric if you're closing those loops.
Yeah.
Certainly for product ideation, I see this a lot for customer surveying as well, because we want that metric, like, whatever you use for customer satisfaction, NPS, customer effort score, like CSAT. Actually, the survey itself matters less to me. It's more, are you doing it? Do you have a methodology around when and why you survey? And most importantly, what do you do with what you get from that? Because the death of a customer feeling like you're genuine in your desire to bring them in on what you're doing is that they feel like they're shouting into abyss, whether it's about product ideation, whether it's, a survey that they gave you do a one-on-one interview with them, anytime they give you any amount of energy or time, the closed loop is the most important part about that. And I think that's where we get so excited by the data we get from those things. We sometimes don't do a great job of closing, of bringing that back around and making sure there's a reward for the effort that was put out there.
Yeah, I totally agree. And when speaking with a lot of SaaS companies, they have like a product feedback process, which goes something like this. I have a feature request as a customer, I will send it to support, or I will send it to my CS manager. But what happens after that? Right? And a lot of support teams or CSMs also struggle because they can circle the feedback internally to a product organization, but there's no real closed loop indeed, as you mentioned. And I think that's totally key. And I think a centralized transparent platform kind of enforces that because all the IDs are there, right? So you have to communicate about it. So
and that way you can prioritize it, right? It's really hard to know whether just because something is loud from one particular place, if it's actually a feature request that is impactful for like the broader group, right? And so in the way that you can see like patterns and volumes and themes coming together. And maybe this is a way to kind of pivot into talking about data more holistically is, Robin, when you're getting this feedback from the community, and these are really valuable data points, so you're learning about your customers, but how do you organize and operationalize that data and then take action on it?
Definitely, yeah. So first, of course, start measuring, right? And I think health scores, for example, Churn Zero has in their application really makes sense, right? Tracking product usage and account health, you really take that into account. We believe that, of course, also customer engagement metrics should really play a big role in, for example, health scoring, because we really see engagement as a leading indicator for retention. So you can think about things like what events or webinars are my customers attending. Is the executive team of my customer actually reading our roadmap updates? What best practices are my customers reading or sharing? What feature requests do they actually have around the product? Right? There are so much things happening outside your product, and you should tackle and gather all those signals, right? And fuel that, first of all, in health scoring, but second of all, also, create playbooks and call to actions based on this, right? Because if your customers are not reading your roadmap updates anymore, and they've been reading that in a steady pace, over the last 2 or 3 years, and they're not doing that anymore, you probably want to know about it, and you probably want to give that customer a call. So based on all these engagement signals, we basically either trigger a call to action or a playbook, or we include that in existing health scores.
Yeah, Raman, I love this point because I think a few years ago we were talking about like, well, you just need data. Like you can't know your customers if you don't have data. As a CS industry, we've moved forward in that, which is great. What you're saying used to be sort of the conversation around platform usage data, which increasingly is a little bit more table stakes. Like, of course, I have to be able to see how someone uses my platform in order to be able to assess if they're getting value and using in the way that will lead to what they want, will lead to the outcomes that they want. So I think we've gotten more comfortable with this idea around different usage personas. Like, okay, these customers use these features because they want these results. These customers use these features because they want a separate set of results, and understanding these usage personas. But I think there's still a lot of work we can do around these engagement personas. A lot of times we'll have a reaction of like, oh, someone's gone dark on me and that's bad. Well, were they ever? not dark, or however you define dark, or are they someone who is a bit more self-service and therefore is going to react better to different types of programs that match with their preferred way of consuming information, and their preferred way of engaging, versus someone who just loves that one-on-one touch. You obviously have to balance that with your resources on your CS teams, sport teams, and things like that. But I think that's where we're headed next, is how do we have this combination of both? How does someone use and succeed with my product, and then how do they engage with me as an organization, and what is the intersection between those two?
Totally agree. Yeah, and to the point on product usage, it's definitely something you need to have as an organization, obviously. What we more and more see is that, customers, of course, they know about their product usage, right? So if you are a CSM and you have like an EBR with your customer, of course, you can present them back how they're using the application, but most of them actually have quite a good feeling, if they're using actually the application. And customers have an agenda, if they go into that EBR. So I would say, as a CSM, you better know which feature requests they have and which support tickets are open before you enter the EBR, because before you know it, you'll be talking about those the full session. And is that then really driving success and value for the customer?
Agreed. Absolutely.
So let's talk then too about qualitative data. So there's obviously, like, we have a lot of quantitative information coming in. So if you talk about the product feedback through a community, that's coming in volumes. We talk about how we're creating our customer health scores and these disparate, other technology elements that are feeding us these like really valuable data points, right? But I mean, to the earlier point around like, oh, is a customer quiet? Is that good or bad, right? Like, data and math can throw you like false positives a lot, right? Because usually customers will use a thing until they don't. So things like, has usage gone up or down? Like, it's a little tricky. So like these like qualitative feedback elements, particularly from the right personas, right? So you talk about an EBR where you're talking to a financial stakeholder, right? And what kind of value they're receiving. If there's a feature request, let's say, that's really important, but you're having a hard time backing that up with quantitative data, it sounds like if you're talking to the right individual and the right type of persona and getting that feedback into your business, that can be a really good way of moving that forward. So would like to ask you both around, in terms of, quotes or feedback or like written, like one-to-one powerful feedback that we can get from our customers. What's a good way to make sure that makes it to the right places in the business?
Yeah, I'll start by saying have more people than yourself in the room. Speaking from a product perspective, if you're like, hey, I'm about to get on a call with a customer who I know has product ideas or has feedback on the sales process, if it's, or really likes or dislikes something they're getting from marketing, if you know going in that you've got a certain topic that touches another team, invite them along. People don't tend to not say no there if they think there's something they can grow from. If nothing else, record the call, because I think hearing that firsthand allows, we all take in information and put it through our own personal filter. So, being able to hear that firsthand, any team member that it might need to touch, I think that's really, really valuable. Outside of that, if we want to stretch them a little bit more broadly, I think there's a lot of ways to do that. Some of them very formal, some of them more informal. Even something like a Slack channel where you list customer quotes or things like that, positive or negative, like that can help socialize. I think the biggest thing with qualitative is, we'll oftentimes get into qualitative because we're trying to better understand a situation or a development that's presented itself to us in a more quantitative capacity. And you just want to be really careful when you go into those qualitative things that we are going in with a really open mind. Going back to my psychology courses in college about collecting interview data in the right way, but there's so much you can do in a qualitative conversation to influence what you talk about and how it's presented and the types of answers that you get. So really making sure anytime you have those, that the objective of the conversation is clear and, you're influencing as little as possible. So you're trying to get the actual thoughts of the person that you're talking to, as opposed to trying to hopefully lead them to a conclusion that you've predetermined. And it happens so easily in any conversation we have. It's just, I think it's something to be cognizant of anytime we do qualitative discovery.
Totally. Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. I think maybe, you know, speaking about Net Promoter Score, for example, right, NPS or survey data, I think, you know, everybody does that, right? I mean, we've been doing NPS scores for years already, but the moment when we automatically pushed our NPS data into Slack channel, right, that was the moment when our organization woke up, because they were like, whoa, you know, on a daily basis, there are a few of these respondents coming in, and it's like, it's real time, and they, you know, even the product team immediately ask, hey, what's up with this customer? Why are they giving such a low score? And then CS team will jump in and say, yeah, it's probably because of this and this and this. So that really makes it so powerful and so visible. And we recently also started doing that with feature requests. So all the feature requests people post on our platform, they immediately, you know, are published in a Slack channel, right? So the entire organization, the entire product engineering team knows, you know, what are the feature gaps, right? What do customers actually want? I'm not saying we are, you know, immediately then also going to create all these things, right? Because of course, you know, you also have maybe your qualitative data together with the quantitative data. So, for example, we check, you know, how much ARR is attached to these individual IDs, because people can upvote all these IDs. So, you know, this top ID, how much ARR does it represent? So these, you know, business data we take into account. But just getting that flow, that stream of information, you know, front and center of your existing employees, that makes such a difference. Because for most people who don't have direct customer contact, it's, you know, they don't know, right? They don't feel the burden, you know, of all these conversations the CS team is actually having.
I actually think that's a key point there, Robin, is sometimes we think other teams who don't always directly interface with customers aren't involved in customer centricity because they don't want to be. I think it's usually because they just haven't been given the exposure. It's a lack of awareness or a lack of opportunity to get that information. So certainly solving those two problems, awareness and opportunity, then opens up, you know, a whole host of other options.
I think we just touched on what is a really important theme in a few places, right? Is like, if your whole organization is going to be customer centric, like Robin, as you're talking about putting like that customer feedback front and center in front of everybody all the time, like that just sort of like oozes into your consciousness after a while, right? And then everybody cares about it, right? And you know, you talk about like different parts of the organization that want different things. Well, I know in my history, at least, that if it serves the customers, like that's a hard thing to fight against, right? So if you can get everybody informed, aware, and caring about what's happening to the customers in the same kinds of ways, that's huge. Then your whole organization is sort of rowing the boat in the right direction.
Definitely.
And I think too, I mean, one thing we haven't touched on is like how to handle negative feedback. That like there needs to be like an understanding from everyone that you're not going to get punished if your customer says something didn't go well, right? Like there's a lot of CYA in the world, and people are not going to want to share with their leadership or with their teams, hey, you know, I just got this feedback from a customer and it wasn't good. It's going to make me look bad, so I'm not going to tell anybody, right? Like that kind of culture has to go away, where hey, you know what, like people are telling us so we can learn and we can grow and we can evaluate. This isn't personal. And I think there's still some of that that people aren't as comfortable with, right? So Abby, to your point about sort of like leading the witness, right? So if you're this happened to us recently, even like in a EBR at like the end of a big project, you know, it was like kumbaya, everyone's on the call, customers like, we love working with you guys, and all of that was genuine, like none of that was false. But then when I had a one-on-one conversation with our stakeholder shortly thereafter to be like, hey man, I really just want you to shoot straight with me about where we could have been better here, that was a very different conversation. So just making sure that you're comfortable with asking for and really seeking true and honest feedback, and practicing it, I think too, is like, you just do it a lot. And you guys have probably found this too, that that's not a natural thing to want to do. Like you're, you know,
because it doesn't feel as good as talking to, you know, people who like you and excited, but there's a lot more similarities between someone who loves your product and really hates your product versus someone who's super neutral about your product. There's a lot more that's these two people both really want your solution and your services to work. And the difference is it is working for someone and it's not working for someone else. So you have that tension, but their desire for it to work is the same. So they're a lot more similar than they are different. We just tend to think about them as being wildly sort of disparate types of people.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think what works, for us internally really well is, of course, our own, customer success community, because, if your customers are unhappy, they will let you know about it, right? And if they don't like that feature, they will let you know, on a daily basis. So actually, analyzing, listening, and fueling all that feedback to your internal stakeholders, it's a transparent thing, right? There's nobody in between who is filtering all that feedback on an ongoing basis. You have a direct connection with all the feedback your customers are giving you, and that's I think super powerful. But I guess, yeah, it can also be a bit scared, right, for some organizations. And to your point on how to deal with negative feedback, I would say, the feedback is already there. It's just, do you know it, right? Are you aware of it, so you can also act upon that? So I prefer to have it, because then, I can do something about it, and versus, I have no clue. I'm flying in the dark here.
It's the devil, you know.
Well, I think we should, we've got about 5 minutes left, and want to do a little bit of Q&A. So to the listeners, please send into the question, the Q&A, your questions that you may have. And while those are coming in, I do want to ask Abby and Robin, how do you know if you're successfully putting the customer at the center of your business? Like, how do you know you're doing that well? I mean, for you guys, what does that look like?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of hallmarks there. First is that you have organizational accountability at all levels, including to the highest levels. Really make sure that this pursuit of customer centricity goes all the way up to your leaders, and bring them closer to client experiences. I think actually whether you have a community of customers, both in the Robin sense of an actual community, but also just a sense of belonging, a sense of community around, that's also a real sign that you have people who enjoy what you're doing, or getting benefit from what you're doing, and want to communicate with one another. And then I think consistency in what your customers experience, that you don't have customer A giving a wildly different story than customer B. I think that's a sign that you're getting to a good place, where it's not just you have these projects or moments of customer centricity, but rather you have a network and systems that support customer centricity. And it's unfortunately a never set it and forget it thing, as we all know. You don't reach a point where you're there and then you're done. It's constantly evolving. So also treating it that way, where it's never a topic that dies out. We don't just decide we've made it, but it's a topic that keeps reinventing itself as things change around us. Robin, what things you think I missed on that list, or you'd add to that list?
No, I totally echo that. I totally agree with you. I think, as I mentioned in the beginning, I don't think there is like one metric, which shows if you're super successful in this. I think it's also, going back to the mindset. I think also as a CEO, you probably have some feeling, if you're really honest to yourself, right? I'm sure I maybe wasn't, super customer centric in the early days, if I look at it now in hindsight. And I think, big signal is, are you really building that broader, community? So not maybe the platform itself, but are you creating buzz around your brand? Are people talking about you? Are you actually, being the default choice, for your key segment?
Do you have loyalty?
Yeah, exactly. Word of mouth. Do you have awesome G2 Crowd reviews, right? Really, really raving about, your software. Do you have that sense of community? Do you feel it, right? These things I think really matter, but I don't think there's like one single metric, unfortunately.
Yeah, we're bumming out a lot of people with that, but
Well, this is an interesting question that came in. Any experience tying employee compensation plans to the customer to lock in certain customer first behaviors or expectations?
Yeah, compensation, as we know, is a great way to make sure people care about something and stay focused on something. I think I'll broadly say, I think the idea of tying employee compensation to some degree of, of customer centricity is important, but you have to make sure that something people can actually influence. I think that could be the tricky point, is if it feels like a metric that's too far away and something you can't actually directly influence, then people become less and less invested in trying to do something about it, even if it is part of their compensation. So whatever you pick, I think it needs to be specific to the team member, specific to their, to what they can control and what they can influence, and something that they can actually see change in. Those would be the big pieces of advice I would give. Robin?
Yeah, I totally agree. Makes total sense. I think one cool example is that we actually have a sales leader who is coming from the success background. So she used to be a success leader and now she's a sales leader. And we had this this incident the other week where we kind of sold to a customer who was not really our ICP. And according to the comp plan, you wouldn't get any commission. And she was like, yeah, totally makes sense. And I thought that was so cool. Because most of the sales people are like, yeah, but I closed the deal, right? I should just get commission on it. But it's not like that, right? Because we really believe that in the end we could make that customer successful. So yeah, these type of small things, I think, really, I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, that is very cool.
Maybe we'll do one more quick question before we wrap up. So let's see. Who should handle renewals in a customer-centric organization?
Well, that is quite the topic to kick off with 30 seconds left, because that is one I could
I
chat about for a long time. Totally separate webinar. I have my personal opinions on this and things that I think have worked really well. I think as CS continues to mature, I think owning the renewal becomes a natural part of customer success. I think in a lot of organizations, there's this idea of, well, if you're focused on adoption, then you can't ask for money, or you need a different type of brain or person that does that. But I think if you are focused on bringing a customer to value, building a relationship with them, then talking about renewal and talking about money is a natural extension of that. There's also a practical part of why I feel that if you want to be able to vouch for, resources, technology, human, whatever it is for your CS team, you want to have a real tie to bottom line business metrics, and renewals are certainly a huge one of those. Now, I think there's variations in how that can work. Sometimes it's that CS queues up the renewal, but maybe someone helps bring it across the line, or they're responsible just for upsells. I don't think there's necessarily one best way to handle that, but I think having CS tied to that renewal and compensated on that renewal means that you are tying what they do to something that ultimately determines whether the business is successful, which is kind of the entire point. Robin, what do you think on that?
I totally agree. And if I would be leading a CS organization, I would actually try to get that ownership, as a CS leader. Because I think, if you tie yourself to more overall, business P&L metrics, I think, it makes so much more sense. You can get so much more done. So yeah, I would definitely vouch for it. I think I think there is something to say, if you're really growing and you're like, maybe a 10, 20,000 people company, probably some specialization, could make sense. But I would say that's maybe up, you need to have a really large CS organization. I think if you're not there, I would definitely keep it also under the, under the responsibilities of a customer success manager.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Abby and Robin, so much for the time today. I do want to remind everybody that the recording of this webinar will be sent out within the next 24 hours. At the end of this webcast, you're going to see a survey pop up. So a little bit of customer feedback. We'd appreciate it if you take a minute before logging off to complete a survey and provide your feedback, because I think, as you've heard today, we all really want good and honest feedback. Thanks again for joining us, and have a great rest of your day, everybody.
Thank you, Megan. Thank you, Robin.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks.